Yes, please proceed on the stage. Yes, it's an all-woman panel, so this is very special for us. Xiaoming, this way. พี่จงรัก points. It's somewhat different than climate change tipping points, and I'm really eager to hear about this research from UN universities in Bonn. This research has been published in The Guardians, the Los Angeles Times, and Agila. So it's quite an international acknowledgement about the risk of tipping points. So not to further ado, let us start. Yes. Can I introduce just a second คุณตั้มเปิดประตูให้กดนิดนึงได้ไหมคะค่ะค่ะ Sorry, the time is shifting. People, there's a lot of people. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. But there's like a live stream, so yes. So may I introduce you to the team of this research and our panel on the risk of tipping point. And firstly, I want to introduce you to Xiaoming, the vice rector from the UNU, and Leta, the lead author from this report, and Simon for the UNU as well for the urban transformation. Last but not least, the poster will be shifting with Delfina from House Institute of the city of Buenos Aires. Welcome. Yes, yes. How should we start this? Xiaoming, can you or yes?
Sure. Hi everyone in the room. Hi. Since we're not so many people, we can have a very relaxed conversation among ourselves first. Maybe there will be more people coming in. I just finished one session on data in B6, and they talk about how to use data, how to use technology, AI, to have better assessment of disaster risk, disaster events. And actually, our report is about data, but not all about data. Our report is more about to look at the interconnectedness of these disasters and to use data, but in a different way, in a more creative and innovative way. I think to communicate science needs to be rethought, because we have been communicating science in journals, and I just read a study about how journalists pick up scientific publications. They tend to pick those with a lot of hard data. But these publications usually do not represent equally the solution part. I think that's a unique point with our report. It does present how bad the situation is, but also to present what we can do about it on individual levels, on collective levels, country level, and global level. So I think that's something quite interesting. But I'm not going to go into any details since the experts are here. I just stop here.
Thank you so much, Xiaoming. So We just launched end of October our report. It's called Interconnected Disaster Risk Report. We are launching it actually every year, so it's a third edition. But this year we have a new topic. If you could put up the slides, thank you so much. So we had 2 editions looking into past disasters where we analyzed what the reasons for those disasters were and how we can actually better address those disasters so that they are not happening in the future. What is new this year that we looked into tipping points, risk tipping points, which is a new concept. It's not the same as climate tipping points. We are rather looking into our very various life supporting systems such as food systems or water systems or space-based infrastructure, and investigate how far we can actually push them, how far we can change them until they are reaching that certain risk tipping point where the system stops working as they should. We are losing the buffering capacity, basically. So it sounds a bit theoretical, but I will give 2 very concrete examples out of the 6 cases which we analyzed. So we looked into uninsurable future, into accelerating extinctions, into space junk, groundwater, melting mountain glaciers, and unbearable heat. I would like to give a short example from space junk and from unbearable heat. And unbearable heat will be also the one which connect well to the research of my colleagues to my side. So this is how we will, so to say, add an additional component. So if it comes to space junk, the issue is that we are sending more and more satellites into space to an extent that the number of satellites and objects which are not used anymore in space increasing such that the risk of catastrophic collisions in space increases. What happens is that we are getting more and more small objects and large objects which are orbiting the Earth with high velocity, and the likelihood of catastrophic collisions increases such that it might render the space actually unusable. That would mean that we are losing actually our space-based early warning system. We are losing our ability to monitor the impacts of climate change. So if it comes to melting of glaciers or sea level rise, we are using space-based technologies to monitor them. We are actually risking losing these tools. We are working together with the design agency, and this is one of the tipping point representations developed together with the design agency, showing on that side, so to say, the drivers and the root causes of risk, pushing towards the brink, towards the cliff, the system we are looking into, and then we are investigating, so to say, the impacts, the possible impacts, and how those impacts, but also the root causes are actually interlinked with other risk tipping points. The second one I would like to quickly introduce is the one we called unbearable heat. This is explicitly driven by climate change, so this is one of those cases where there's a strong connection to climate change. Basically, we are looking into the human body's capacity to regulate heat, which is at one point, which we call wet bulb temperature, that is a combination of heat and humidity. At one point, the human body cannot sweat anymore because of the high wet bulb temperature outside, so that the internal regulation capacity is at risk and cannot be regulated anymore. This is especially often happening in cities, in urban context, and this is why our 2 colleagues will pick up, so to say, this urban context as next. This relates to the built-up environment, to the urban heat island effect, and to the lack of cooling and circulation in cities many times. And again, we looked in the report into what are the root causes, what are the drivers, and how are these interlinked with other risk tipping points. Such influence figure shows, so to say, this cascading effect. So when we are reaching unbearable heat, this also means that we are escalating further species extinction, escalating further glacier melting, but then that has again impact also on groundwater resources. So basically the report provides a network analysis how these things are interlinked and how actually the solution needs to be designed. So the figure shows how we are actually on the business as usual pathway pushed towards a cliff, and what kind of actions we can actually take to prevent that. In the context of tipping points, we are talking about so-called avoid solutions. Those are the solutions which help us actually to prevent reaching the tipping point. And then we are talking about so-called adapt solutions. So those are the solutions which we need to implement when we anticipate that we will actually cross a risk tipping point, or if we already crossed it. Like the groundwater tipping point, risk tipping point is reached in many places on the earth already, like in Saudi Arabia, but also in California and certain parts of India. Punjab is approaching that point. So, and what the report provides is actually a solution framework, which helps us to categorize the different solutions and responses in terms of how far it helps us to avoid or just delay reaching the tipping point. And ultimately, we really think that the type of solution we need to look at are transformational solutions. So those pathways which actually build a completely different vision, and those visions are built from different pieces, individual actions, but also large-scale actions on society level or on city level, depending on the challenge at hand, so to say. And maybe this is actually a good point to stop. I could talk about this report 1 more hour, but time is at the essence. So I think this is a good point to actually hand over to my colleague Simona.
Thanks, Zita. And I never get tired of listening to more from this super exciting report, because it's really something very unique, because it has this more systemic approach, because it looks into what is happening if we reach this tipping point. And it's really frightening if you think about it. And then going back to the tipping point of unbearable heat, that I had the pleasure of being part of the team writing the technical report behind, because behind this nice document there's more pages with a lot of resources and a lot of thoughts that had gone into. And for the unbearable heat, we were looking into what actually happens if we reach that. And I mean, we can't play around with biology. If the temperature and humidity go beyond a certain threshold, we can't survive. We can do whatever. So we can, and then Zita said, we only have adapt or transform solutions, and adaptation will not bring us all the way. So, and at the same time, at the same time, thinking about what we can do in cities and why we have to do it, it's very logical that, I mean, we're in Dubai, right? It's a very hot city, and last night it also got very humid, and out of a sudden you felt the heat even more. And this is reality already for a large share of the world population living in cities, which is already more than half of the global population. By 2050, it'll be 2/3. How will they live in future? So we need to decide. We need to think about 2 things: what is happening to the people living in those cities, and what is happening elsewhere, pushing more people into cities. So we already need to think about that. What happens then in the future? So how do we adapt, and how do we avoid? Avoid means less emissions in the long run, but also thinking about where will we live in future. And then there's a lot of adapt solutions, more or less sustainable ones, to be very honest. And probably the most go-to solution would be think about air conditioning. But if we think about it further, yes, it will cool down our apartments, but in the end, is it sustainable? Depends very much where the energy is coming from. And it's also heating the outside even more. So we have to shift more towards nature-based solutions and other approaches in the long run, but that is obviously easier said than done. And we need to do it right now, because one special thing about cities and heat, but also any other challenges, whatever we build now, let it be houses, let it be infrastructures, it is built for the next decades. So it's not about it's something right now and next year we do it differently. No, it's the decisions now that have to last and that have to be planned for the cities in the future. And just to give you one number, in 2019 there was a very interesting paper published about the future climate conditions of cities and how that shifts. And I'm from Central Europe, so one issue that struck me was that by 2050 the city of London will have the climate that right now the city of Madrid has in Spain, and Spanish cities will face a climate that right now cities in Morocco have. Are we dealing with that? Are we already planning for it? I don't necessarily think so, and it's even more worrisome when we think about the most vulnerable part of the urban population that doesn't even have the means, nor the bandwidth, nor, let's say, the long-term planning opportunities that are very much needed, and that is where my colleague Delfina is working on.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. So to contextualize a little bit, I work at the local government in the city of Buenos Aires. We are actually going through these unbearable heat waves. This past March, we had the hottest heat wave in 50 years. It lasted 15 days, and it reached the highest temperature the city had ever seen. So we are already seeing these consequences in the increase of temperature the last 10 years. And of course, this is worst for the most vulnerable. The vulnerable neighborhoods that I work in the city of Buenos Aires are informal settlements or slums, which don't have access to safe water, which don't have access to sewage, to basic public services. And of course, because of the density, they also don't have nature in them. So that is the heat wave, the heat island effect is bigger in these places. So what we are doing at the local government right now in terms of adaptation has a softer part in terms of teaching people and having workshops so that they can understand what's happening. It is important to let people know what the effects of this unbearable heat are, how to take care of themselves, how to hydrate, how to look for safe places when these waves come. And as well, we are looking in terms of nature-based solutions to these safe refuges that the city already has and how to make them public and accessible for all, and how to create this network of safe refuges within the city in places, in big parks which have a lot of trees so that the temperature there is lower, in terms of, shopping malls with air conditioning, but the point of it is to look for safe places that naturally have these better conditions. We are also creating new green streets within the city, so we are transforming existing streets into greener ones. We are removing pavement, we are putting them in a pedestrian prioritization, we are creating we are reforestation, creating green places, so to create green corridors as well. And in the most particular part, which is where I work, we are actually working in integrating these informal settlements. What this means is to build and give the basic services they need, so to construct safe water, canals, to build infrastructure, energy, etc., to create new streets, which seems like a little small thing, but a street is a place where people can access their houses, it's a way that houses can ventilate, can illuminate. It's the place where trees grow. So in order to reforest and create this green infrastructure, you need space. And we are doing that in the city of Buenos Aires, in 5 neighborhoods in particular, and in Barrio 20, which is where they are helping, with the Transformative Urban Coalition program, which is a program that is helping us to understand that although there are a lot of basic needs that still have to be achieved, green and climate change and how to include nature-based solutions, it's the initial part of that process as well, and how to include these green solutions in every step of this integration, social and urban processes. Would anyone like to continue with it?
Can I jump in and ask questions? Like Bangkok, like heat is so normal. We don't even see it as a problem. How can we address this to the policy level? Because otherwise people just feel like, yeah, this is how we live and bear with it. Yes, I think this is a very critical, not even realize that urban heat is actually a problem.
Then you can talk about the first part that I said about giving these workshops. It's really important to work with the community. So for people to understand that the heat they're feeling is really cause of something else, they need to know what that is. So we work with local communities. We particularly have been working with these 5 neighborhoods. So we have environmental tables in which we discuss all of these topics. We have workshops with kids, with adults in terms of the entire city. So we go to senior citizens' house and we talk about these topics, because the first part is for people to understand what is happening and for that information to be on a ground level. Not in this, the report is an amazing thing, but not everybody has access to this type of information. So as a policymakers, we need to understand that people's knowledge is as important as the public policies we create. And then there's the local public policies that can be done, like the ones that I've already said, that perhaps people in the short term won't see it or won't understand them, but in the midterm, they will have these green corridors, they will use it, they will understand that there's a place in the city that is safe for them in these particular moments.
So teach them to understand the risk tipping point in a personal level.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Understanding at a human-based level.
Yes. Yes, because culturally, we don't feel fear of heat, right? So yes. Any adding on? Yes.
Yeah, maybe just to add one aspect to your question, because indeed, especially those areas which haven't been exposed to such heat in the past are especially vulnerable, because they do not have awareness, they do not have a means to cope with heat. But on the other hand, also cities which are used to this heat, if it's getting hotter and hotter, it's important not to miss that point when it's getting out of the usual and it's getting kind of a different animal. This is a term I heard when there was a super heat wave, a heat dome actually over parts of Greece this year. And what I read in a newspaper was that yes, we are used to heat, but this is a different animal. And I think this is probably something to watch out. So even in areas where people think, okay, we know heat, but the thing is coming is worse than that, and it's easy to be missed in a way, because people think, okay, this is just something we know how to deal with.
Yeah, I think it's such a new thing that is either too familiar or not familiar at all. And I think the risk tipping point is so easy to happen. Yes. Is there any question from the audience? Please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue. I'm wondering about yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Pamela. Thank you so much for your sharing and the resources that you've been developing. I'm a landscape architect, as is Koch, and I actually wanted to ask a question. I feel like we have these tools in our toolkit for urban greening and tackling urban heat island effect, but some of the barriers that we come across feel insurmountable. And so I was curious, very difficult to overcome. And so I was curious, especially for your example in Buenos Aires, you mentioned removing pavement in the projects, and I feel maybe especially in the United States that it seems like that's impossible sometimes, right? People won't give up the cars or whatever that means. So I would love to hear how you overcame those challenges to implementing those urban greening strategies.
It's always a challenge when you create these like new innovations. People, when they start hearing about it, they're like, oh, that's okay, I will have more green in my street, that's great. And once you tell them like, well, you won't have a garage anymore, then the green is out. And we do tackle with those things. We created like a huge study within the city of Buenos Aires. Is divided in like 15 comunas, they're called. So we did a huge study with help with the French Development Agency in order to understand the typology of streets the city of Buenos Aires had. And with that input, we started talking to the neighbors of the surroundings to understand the use they gave that street. So it was a process that included the neighbors of the area, and it wasn't like a policy that came from top bottom. It was something that it was collaborative with the neighbors in terms of different tables, different processes, and different designs that were co-designs with them. So that helped us a lot. We have 48 streets that we have changed into green streets. Of course, there aren't like big avenues. That's not feasible. There were streets that perhaps they didn't have more than a local use. And what we created is in terms of mobility, the sideways and alternative paths through that didn't have to go through that street. And with that design, the integration of creating new green streets, giving away pavement, etc., etc. So it's a really nice project that I didn't work precisely in it, but I'm really familiar of it. It's a really interesting project. I think the base of it was the co-design and have a really good diagnosis of what was happening in the streets of the city.
I can ask questions about the university topic of this research and try to push this into the real action. How can we see that link? Because I think the role of higher education is so important, but it's so inactive in the climate realm or in this space. Is there any policy from that to push this thing into an action, and especially about the urban heat that is so new?
Does it work? Yeah, okay. I think I just want to add a little bit to the previous topic. I think one thing we realize, raising awareness is quite important, especially for people who are very used to heat. But they're not aware, once you have reached the temperature of this 35 degrees wet temperature, then human bodies could no longer deal with that kind of heat, even if you're used to it. It's just physically impossible to do it. I think to raise that kind of awareness is very important, even for people in Thailand who are very much used to the heat, because that's where the body stops working simply. And another thing is, this report is this year's edition. We had a last edition last year, and it examined a case study in British Columbia. That was also a heat wave, and many elderly citizens passed away because of the heat, because the city wasn't prepared for such heat. So there is also a governance level. So on individual level, we need to raise people's awareness, but you mentioned the policy is the important part. I think the governance level is also a very important one. In that case, there wasn't an office which is responsible for dealing with heat. Like in Thailand or in many countries, there are offices dealing with flood disaster, but not dealing with heat.
Not drown as well.
Exactly. So on that level,
yes,
it's quite important to have that. And in terms of education, I think our report does have that purpose to bring the message to a broader audience. So it's quite educational. The language is simple to understand. The media can pick it up. And if scientists want to do more, to learn more, they can read the technical reports. So it is already an endeavor in that direction.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, please add on.
If I may-
Simone, yeah.
If I may add just a sentence, because I think Delphina started from saying, yeah, people see it's hot, but they don't know the reasons behind. And I believe this report is exactly closing that gap. Not only seeing a problem, but trying to question it and trying to see where it's coming from. Because often we try just to cure the symptoms, but not the actual problems. But we need to take a look at the problems behind. And out of these 6 tipping points that were covered in this year, I mean, we also see they're interlinked, right? Species extinction is linked to heat, among others, and will trickle down to having other effects. Ida can say that in more beautiful words than I can, but to me that was really impressive to see, and I think that is what we're trying to do now in any other projects in our institute as well. As you asked, how does this trickle down into education or policy? We're not necessarily doing these policies, but we do inform them, and we come with that mindset of, hey, we need to take a more systemic approach. It's not enough just to be a deep dive expert in one single topic. I think that's not the times anymore to be that, because we need really to think beyond and see what's the interlinkages to other challenges.
Yes, I really agree. And before getting to like adapt or die kind of spot, you kind of like warning that this is like a risk tipping point that we have to take actions. And of course, in my context of the country and the city, flooding is like millions of people displaced, hundreds of them, blah blah blah. But for the heat, it's just like 1 or 2 person, like or more than that in majority. But in terms of like death, kind of rate, we don't see that dramatically yet. And I think it's gonna be more and more challenging for us if we're not ready at this moment. And yes, please, Sita.
Maybe just to add one note, because what we are seeing in many of these risk tipping points is that there's a huge equity issue there. If it comes to urban heat, it's there's a certain part of urban population which are most exposed to the heat, and kind of the type of the housing, or having an air conditioning or not having one, can get then really a question of life or death. And this is one of the reasons why we really want to talk about it. And also, if we are talking about urban planning, and here Simona and you knows more than I, but some of the interventions are more equitable than others. So when we are looking into solutions and what we would like to implement, it's really important to have also this in mind. Do I help with that intervention large part of the city? Like if I am making possible that more air circulation is into the city center, that helps many people at the same time. But there are also interventions which are very particular and oftentimes not necessarily supporting the most vulnerable. So that just to make this point that, and this is not just this is tipping point. So if it comes to groundwater issues, so who is lacking access to water? Usually the poorest farmers are the first who are not able to reach the groundwater anymore, because drilling costs a lot of money, so to say. And so we see this across. It's a huge equity issue.
Yes, and I think it's not just drowning to get the water is expensive, but the whole city is actually sinking faster than the sea level rise. I think there's so many systematic related. But Sita, can I ask you to go with us again with the 6 risk tipping points that you think we should focusing on? One is urban heat. The second one is about underground water. The third one is
uninsurable future. So this is mainly for regions which used insurance, risk insurance, to cover part of the risk, so to say. In some countries it's not usual, but in other countries it's used heavily, so to say, to help to recover after disaster. And we are seeing that with climate change is increasingly under threat. Then we looked into space junk, so the fact that we are sending more and more satellites into Earth so that the risk of catastrophic collisions is increasing. And with that, we are risking that we are losing our early warning capabilities and losing our space-based
Let's go on the space
infrastructure.
now. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. The last two.
The melting of glaciers.
Melting of glaciers. Yes.
And species extinction. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Species biodiversity. Yes.
Yes.
Relating that. Yeah. Any questions from the audience about this risk tipping point? And of course, we have a sector from the urban, the sector from the academic, sitting together talking about what's kind of risk the whole world is actually confronting. So, yes. Okay, so maybe back to me again. So I'm wondering, there's like several nations according to each tipping point that kind of like most at risk. How could this tipping point spread away to this global audience? What is the next step? This is such a good book or good information, good research that should reach to the ground people. How can we make this thing known more? I'm actually giving a little bit pressure to the academic side. Yes. Yes. Xiaoming, like, give the mic to me. Yes. Okay.
It is a tough question, but our university has only postgraduate degrees, so we bring the knowledge to that knowledge level for master students. But I do know that some of our colleagues have adult children, and their children are doing their bachelor's degrees, and they're using this report as their thesis topic and to look at it more in depth. But we don't engage with schools or kindergarten. We're not on that kind of level. But our master students are kind of multipliers. They will go out and become policymakers and work on community levels. So in that sense, we do spread the word with our methodology and also with the knowledge we created.
Yes. Yes, very good, great response that, of course, from the level of making decision, maybe this thing have to push in that level before it's getting a bottom-up push as well. And I think that's kind of like all the challenges that we are confronting right now at COP, that all this terminology is very complex and very not a ground verbal kind of language. And I think that's need kind of both way pushing. Yes.
Maybe
So,
just one thing
yes,
to
please.
add. In the last chapter, we propose 5 changes we can and should make. And these changes really give people agency to do something about it. These are also quite simple things. For instance, to be a good ancestor. Who wouldn't want to be that? I believe many of us have children. We want to be good parents to our children and want to be good ancestors to our children's children. This is quite simple, and that motivates us to take our agency and do something about it.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from the floor? Okay, so if not, please give a big applause to all the speakers. We're very honored to have you here. And we will have a good photo, so please stay with us a bit. May I invite Professor